tarde. É um prazer imenso estar aqui hoje. Este foi um convite mesmo muito bonito que eu não estava à espera e eu quero agradecer a todos que me convidaram, do Grada Institute, Catarina, Lorena, desta mostra, Eugênio, a Natália e todos aqueles que estão envolvidos. Eu estou muito feliz de estar aqui. Eu acho que este convite também fecha um ciclo muito importante que é o triângulo do Black Atlantic, Europa, África e agora a América do Sul, que é muito necessário. Eu já não falo português há muito, muito tempo, porque eu vivo em Berlim. E eu só falo português com os meus filhos, que são muito pequeninos, têm 2 e 4 anos. Portanto, o meu português tornou-se muito rudimentar. Da, di, ou tem doi. Portanto, eu não vou conseguir fazer esta palestra-performance em português, mas em inglês. Vai ter aqui no ecrã da esquerda a legendagem feita pelo Bruno, que eu agradeço imenso. Portanto, para acompanharem aqueles que não conseguem acompanhar em inglês, porque eu trabalho em inglês, podem olhar para o lado esquerdo e podem acompanhar a minha escrita. Esta palestra-performance é uma colagem do meu trabalho, é uma colagem do meu trabalho literário e visual. E o meu trabalho, eu estou muito ligada à ideia da performing knowledge, de trazer knowledge, trazer conhecimento à performance. Eu começo geralmente com a escrita. A escrita também é muito híbrida entre o teórico e o narrativo, o literário e o lírico. E eu me interesso muito em cruzar as várias disciplinas e os vários formatos. E muitas das vezes eu deixo os textos como eles são, por isso eu vou ler algumas histórias, e outras vezes eu passo os textos para instalações de vídeo ou para performance, como esta que estão a ver atrás, que eu depois vou mostrar para vocês. Okay? Antes de eu começar, eu queria começar com uma citação que me motivou muito no meu trabalho. É a citação de Bell Hooks, que é uma das feministas mais importantes hoje em dia do movimento negro. E ela escreveu um livro muito bonito que se chama Teaching to Transgress, ensinar para transgredir. E tem vários ensaios lá dentro. E um dos ensaios encantou-me a primeira vez que eu li. E eu gostava só de ler esta passagem porque descreve para mim muito bem o que é descolonizar o conhecimento. Eu vou ler em inglês, mas nós vamos começar com as legendas, ok? I came to theory because I was hurting. The pain within me was so intense that I could not go on living. I came to theory desperate, wanting to comprehend, to grasp what was happening around me. Most importantly, I wanted to make the hurt go away. That's why I came to theory. I saw in theory a location for healing. Esta é uma passagem muito bonita e o que ela fala é que geralmente o conhecimento que habita as instituições é um conhecimento violento, colonial, discriminatório. Ela começou a escrever porque queria que a escrita e a teoria fossem um lugar de pertença, de libertação. Isso é descolonizar o conhecimento. Eu acho que descolonizar o conhecimento começa quando a biografia se junta à teoria e a teoria à biografia, que é o que ela fala aqui. Então eu vou começar com as minhas histórias e com os meus vídeos. A primeira história é a máscara, the mask. In the living room of my grandmother's house, there was a picture of Escrava Anastasia above the sofa on the left side of the wall. Every Friday we put a candle, a white flower, a glass of clean water and a bowl of fresh coffee with no sugar. My grandmother used to tell me how Escrava Anastasia was incarcerated in a mask, as it was common to those who spoke words of emancipation during slavery. And she told me I should always remember her. I do remember. I remember because this story has been memorized. I cannot forget it. The colonial past is memorized in a way that one is unable to forget it. Sometimes one would prefer not to remember, but one can actually not. The theory of memory is in reality a theory of forgetting. One cannot simply forget, and one cannot avoid remembering. The mask cannot be forgotten. It was a very concrete piece, a real instrument, which became part of the European colonial project for more than 300 years. It was composed of a bit placed inside the mouth of the black subject, clamped between the tongue and the jaw and fixed behind the head with two strings, one surrounding the chin and the second surrounding the nose and the forehead. Formerly, the mask was used by white masters to prevent enslaved Africans from eating sugar cane, cacao beans, and coffee beans while working on the plantations, but its primary function was to implement a sense of speechlessness and of fear, the fear of speaking. The mask raises therefore many, many questions. Who can speak and who cannot? And above all, what can we speak about? Why must the mouth of the black subject be fastened? Why must she, he, it or they become silent? What could this black subject say if its mouth were not sealed? And what would the white subject have to listen to? There is this apprehensive fear that if the colonial subject speaks, the colonizer will have to listen. It would be forced into an uncomfortable confrontation with other truths, truths which are not supposed to be spoken, to be heard, and which should be kept quiet as secrets. I like this expression, kept quiet as secrets. It announces how someone is about to reveal what is presumed not to be told. It should remain a secret. We have so many secrets. Secret words like slavery, secret words like colonialism, and the most secret word, racism. The fear of listening to what could be possibly revealed can be articulated with the psychoanalytical notion of repression. Repression lies exactly in turning something away and keeping it at distance from the conscious. It is that process by which certain truths can only exist in the deepness of our unconscious, far away from the surface, due to the extreme anxiety, guilt, or shame that they cause. Just imagine an iceberg floating in the blue water. All repressed truths are still there, but they are not at the surface. They are rendered to deepness. One knows, but one wants to make the known unknown. Oh, I don't understand what you're talking about. I actually don't remember. I don't really believe in what you're saying. Aren't you exaggerating? I think you're taking this too serious. You are too sensitive about racism. These are expressions of this process of repression in which one resists making the unconscious information conscious, keeping it as a secret. The mouth is therefore a very special organ, an organ that symbolizes speech and enunciation. Within racism, the mouth becomes the organ of oppression par excellence. It is the organ that enunciates certain unpleasant truths and which needs to be severely confined, controlled, and colonized. If I am telling you this, that means that speaking becomes somehow virtually impossible. It is not that we have not been speaking. We've been speaking since hundreds of years, but rather that our voices through racism become silent. This impossibility illustrates how speaking and silencing emerge like an analogous project. a project between the speaking subject and the listeners. For instance, today, in this scenario, I am the speaking subject. You came here to listen to me, and I become the speaking subject because you are listening. Imagine you stop listening to what I say. Would I still be the speaking subject? Imagine that you don't want to listen anymore, but still I'm delivering knowledge. Would I be the speaking subject? We can make a game, and I count until 3 and ask you to start speaking. You can speak on your own or with your neighbor. But when I say stop, you stop. Tá bom? Eu conto até 3 e vocês falam. Finalmente podem falar sozinhos. Ou então podem falar com o vizinho. Mas quando eu disser stop, nós paramos. Ok? Ok. Tá bom? Então, 1, 2, 3, vocês começam a falar. E eu continuo a ler o meu texto. Como eu estava a ler antes. Eu continuo a trazer o meu conhecimento, como eu fiz antes. Eu continuo a trazer a família, as ideias, as palavras, o ritmo, o conhecimento, está nas margens. Eu trago para aqui, para sempre, e vocês já me ouvem. Stop! Well done. Muito bem. É isto mesmo que eu estou a falar. Muito bem. The act of speaking is really a negotiation between those who speak and those who listen. That is, between the speaking subjects and their listeners. I didn't stop speaking. I didn't stop delivering knowledge. I didn't stop bringing knowledge to the room. But I didn't have the authority of the speaking subject anymore. So there is a negotiation between the speaker and the listener, and the speaker can only become the speaking subject if the others decide to listen to. In other words, one can only speak when one's voice is listened to. But being listened to goes beyond this dialectic. Being listened to also means belonging. And we all know that those who belong are those who are listened to, and those who are not listened to are those who cannot belong. The mask that I showed you before recreates this project by controlling the possibility that the colonized might one day be listened to, and consequently might one day belong. Okay, this is the end of the first story. We go now to the second part. Carlos, estás pronto? Tá. Esta segunda parte eu queria fazer uma sequência com este filme, com a segunda história. E este filme chama-se Conakry. Eu fiz este filme Conakry em colaboração com 2 outras artistas, Filipa César e Diana McCarthy, que também está no filme. E este filme é dedicado a Amílcar Cabral, que foi um dos líderes mais importantes do movimento africano, vindo da Guiné-Bissau e de Cabo Verde. Minha família vem de São Tomé e Príncipe e de Angola, e Amílcar Cabral foi muito, muito importante para nós, para o movimento. Ele era muito apaixonado por cinema, e ele também compreendia este conceito de performing knowledge, que é trazer o conhecimento à performance, à visualização, ao movimento. E o que ele fez, ele levou vários jovens para Cuba para se tornarem filmmakers, realizadores de cinema. Ele era muito apaixonado por cinema e ele achava que através do cinema e das imagens se podia fazer um processo de educação e de descolonização. E ele mandou 4 jovens para Flora Gomes, Sana, que são os grandes realizadores do cinema africano hoje em dia, e eles voltaram e fizeram uma série de filmagens. Esta footage que nós vamos ver desapareceu, e este projeto que nós temos foi durante o tempo da descolonização, durante o tempo da guerra, desapareceram as imagens, e depois, uma vez reencontradas, houve uma digitação da imagem, e nós começámos a trabalhar com pequenas partes das imagens recuperadas e começámos este processo que para mim é um outro processo de descolonizar o conhecimento, que é um pouco como fazer um funeral digno. E eu acho que isso também é parte da descolonização do conhecimento. Quando nós temos uma história fragmentada em que pessoas que contribuíram imenso não são reconhecidas e não são documentadas não nos livros, não são vistas nos museus, nos filmes, etc. Eu acho que para nós, como uma nova geração, parte do descolonizamento do conhecimento é fazer um funeral sendo recolher as partes que nós conhecemos e dar um nome de novo à história, dar uma nova narrativa à história que nunca foi dada e fazer um funeral e enterrar para amansar os fantasmas. Eu acho que a história colonial é como um fantasma que nos continua sempre a interromper o dia a dia, porque nunca foi enterrado propriamente, nunca houve um dignifying burial no funeral. E eu acho que este projeto é exatamente isso. Vamos mostrar, Carlos? Tem legendas, portanto vocês vão conseguir seguir.
I'm delighted to inform the public that after more than 30 years, the Ghanaian Film Archive is to be made accessible. Around 40 hours of film were digitized in the summer of 2012. The focus is on works by Jose Bolama Kabumba, Josefina Crato, Flora Gomes, and Sana Enhada. They shot the films between 1972 and 1980 in Guinea-Bissau, during the struggle for independence and consequent post-independence nation building. Material evidence of the birth of a Ghanaian film production. In 1967, Amilcar Cabral sent these 4 young Ghanaians to Cuba to be trained in filmmaking at the Instituto Cubano de Arte e Industria Cinematográficos. There, they assisted Santiago Alvarez. In 1972, the 4 returned to Guinea-Bissau to document the independence movement. Early media activists. The archive includes a mix of raw footage, documentary films, newsreels, and sound, some sent from countries that supported the Ghanaian struggle. Chris Marker left films there in 1979. In 2012, Felipe Cesar and Nacho Checa traveled to Bissau shortly after the April 12th coup d'etat to bring the film material to Berlin. For years, these films were stored at the National Film and Audiovisual Institute of Guinea-Bissau, founded by Mario de Andrade in 1977. The 16mm film rolls, in varying states of decay, are being digitized with a prototype film reader designed by engineer Rainer Meyer. For technical, economic, and diplomatic reasons, the sound should be recovered and digitized at a later date. The originals and digital copies will be returned to Bissau in late 2012. This is the House of World Cultures in Berlin. In 1957, it was a Congress Center, a gift from the United States of America to West Germany. That is Grada Kilomba, the Portuguese writer. She will share her readings of particular footage from this archive. Conakry, September 1972, the Week of Information. One of Cabral's less-known laboratories.
Decolonization, what a beautiful word. Written in images, picture by picture, a visual language portrayed in each one of these reels. Here cinema becomes a decolonial act.
In 1956, Amílcar Cabral founded the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau and Cape Verde. For 11 years, he led the armed resistance to Portuguese colonialism. This West African struggle ended in 1974 with the fall of the Portuguese dictatorship. This is the People's Palace in Conakry. In 1967, this Congress Center was partly a gift from China to the People's Revolutionary Republic of Guinea.
I am speaking because the sounds belonging to these images have not arrived yet. Maybe they never will. What I speak and have to say may never be what these reels want to tell, but I tell you and I reassure you that the name Amílcar Cabral was never revealed to me in my history books, nor mentioned in my classroom in Lisbon, where other black children and I sat in the back. My memories are not sweet, though they could have been. They could have been memories of pride if these images have been shown to me earlier before. They do not come late. They come on time.
That is Amílcar Cabral. Here he performs the role of host and curator, receiving his guests, offering them tours of his event. These are historical moments. Which history? The struggle for African independence? The political strength of tradition and modernity? Militant filmmaking in Africa? Any of those.
Stokely Carmichael, the ex-minister of the Black Panther Party, and his wife, the South African singer Miriam Makeba, entered the building. André Touré, Guinea-Conakry's First Lady, arrives. Sékou Touré, the President of Guinea-Conakry, a guest of Cabral in his own country. José Bulama Kobumba, Josefina Crato, Flora Gomes, and Sana Nehada, the 4 young filmmakers who have just returned from Cuba, captured the colonial act. They captured the blink of strength, looks of competence and sovereignty mixed with joy and fulfillment. They captured the images that I would have liked to have seen as a child.
Even without sound, these images tell a story. Rather, many stories. But whose? The subjects? 4 young filmmakers? The citizens of an unstable post-revolutionary Guinea-Bissau? The world? I chose the world. Then it is also my story. Why should these images interest me? One from a distant desert. Fragments reach New Mexico via San Soleil. Not these exact images, but traces of this story.
Cabral's hand gently points to a new identity, his continent given a new body, his history given a new language, his people given a new shelter, his language recovered, numbers, statistics, documents, maps, pictures, books, a whole room full of empirical evidence against those intrusive memories of subordination.
The eroding film, eroding time, and eroding space. These images are so far away, but also so near. Are they memories, lost ones or found ones? What about the children in their crisp pioneer uniforms? What happened to them? They would be my age, my contemporaries. Do they remember this moment fondly?
Cabral points at the arsenal confiscated from the Portuguese army, unfolds the Portuguese flag to Madame Touré. There is no bitterness in his gestures, nor in his words. In December 1966, during the liberation struggle, he writes a letter to all the Portuguese soldiers. Nesta quadra do ano, em que as famílias comemoram a sua existência e se renovam nos corações dos homens as esperanças de uma vida melhor, tenho o prazer de vos dirigir saudações fraternais e combativas em nome da direção do nosso partido e do nosso povo. Somos a mesma família, porque enfrentamos juntos os mesmos problemas.
There is something else. These are revolutionaries in the midst of revolution. Is this how a revolution imagines itself? So beautiful.
Decolonization was a global act, an act of humanism, where each single individual was invited to join, all gathered in the same room. Women and men, children and adults, from north and south, speaking a common virtual language, these moments captured in topographic celluloid. 4 months later, Amílcar Cabral was assassinated. This raw footage almost disappeared, making us believe this has never existed. Questions?
No filme Conakry, como viram, nós filmamos só com um shot, only with 16mm. Então nós tivemos que ensaiar muito bem a coreografia e o filme é filmado só de uma vez. Diana entra com o diálogo e eu entro com o diálogo e nós coordenamos com as imagens. Eu gosto muito deste filme porque tem assim uma dimensão em que nós entramos, nós nos dissolvemos nas imagens e entramos no passado para redefinir o que é conhecimento. E acho que é uma ótima passagem para a segunda história, Who Can Speak? In the last years I've been working as a professor at university, at the University Humboldt University in Berlin, in gender studies and post-colonial studies. And on the very first day of each semester, I count how many students are in the room, and then I ask them to raise their hands in case they know the questions. We want to know how many of them knows what. I start by asking very, very simple questions like, what was the Berlin Conference, 1884-85? Which Asian and African countries were colonized by Germany or by Portugal? How many years did the colonization last? And then I conclude with more specific questions such as, who was Amílcar Cabral? Who was Queen Muzinga? When was Patrice Lumumba assassinated? Who was Maya Angelou? Who wrote Black Skin, White Masks? Name a book by Audre Lorde. De que língua deriva o termo quilombo? E quilomba, sabem o que significa? Quantas línguas, não dialetos como se diz, línguas são faladas em Angola? Very, very simple questions. The Berlin Conference is when Otto von Bismarck invited all European countries to come to Berlin to divide the continent of Africa among themselves. That is the Berlin Conference. They had a ruler and divided the continent with a line in 7 pieces. One piece for the Germans, one piece for the Belgians, for the British, one piece for the Italians, one piece for the French, one piece for the Spanish, and one for the Portuguese. The seminars were always made of 80 or 100 students. It was always packed, and most of the students could not answer these questions. They were reluctant to respond. You ask yourself, but how is it possible to be on the first, third, second, fourth year of university and you don't have an answer to such basic knowledge? Then finally, some of the students, very few, mostly black students and students of color, started very carefully to raise their hands as an answer. At that particular moment, the room became a performative space where the idea of knowledge was being exposed and questioned. They could indeed visualize that the concept of knowledge is intrinsically linked with race, gender, and power. Suddenly those who are usually unseen become visible, and those who are always seen become invisible. Those who usually are silent started speaking, and those who always speak became silent. Silent not because they cannot articulate their voices or tongues or because they have a mask, but rather because they do not possess that knowledge. Who knows what? And who doesn't? And why? What knowledge is acknowledged as such, and what knowledge is not? What knowledge has been made part of the official agendas, and what knowledge has not? Whose knowledge is this? Who is acknowledged to have knowledge, and who is not? And who can teach knowledge? Who can produce knowledge? Who can perform it, and who cannot? As you see, the concept of knowledge is not a simple apolitical study of truth. It is not, but rather the reproduction of racial and gender power relations, which define not only what counts as true, but also in whom to believe. Knowledgeable becomes then all epistemologies that reflect the specific political interest of a white colonial patriarchal society. Please let me tell you what epistemology is. Epistemology has derived from the Greek words episteme, meaning knowledge, and logos, meaning science, is the science of the acquisition of knowledge. That means it determines the themes, which questions, which topics deserve attention, and which questions merit to be questioned in order to produce knowledge. Second, paradigms, which narratives and interpretations can be used to explain a phenomenon, so to say, from which perspective can you produce knowledge? And third, the methods, in which form and format can be used to produce truthful knowledge. Epistemology, as I said, defines not only how to produce knowledge, but also who can produce knowledge, with which questions, which perspective, and which format. So to say, it defines in whom to believe. It is so common to hear how interesting our work is, but a little bit too specific. This is not objective at all, is it? You have to be a little bit more neutral. If you want to be an academic, you cannot be personal. Science is universal, not subjective. Your problem is that you overinterpret reality. You must think that you are the queen of interpretation. These are remarks that illustrates the colonial hierarchy in which black people reside. As soon as we start speaking and delivering knowledge, our voices are silenced by these comments, which actually function like a metaphorical mask. They place our discourse back at the margin as deviant in knowledge, while white discourses remain at the center as the norm. When they speak is scientific, when we speak is unscientific. When they speak is universal, When we speak is specific. When they speak is objective. When we speak is subjective. When they speak is neutral. We are personal. They are rational. We are emotional. They are impartial. We are partial. They have facts. We have opinions. They have knowledge. And we have experiences. We are not dealing here with the peaceful coexistence of words. No. But rather with a violent hierarchy which defines who can speak. Let's see the first video, Carlos. Can I? Please.
Today, I expose what has been kept quiet as a secret. I expose racism without regret, pity, shame, or guilt.
I once had this conversation with a childhood friend about black people. And I told her how it is being black here, and that it is not easy for me always to be the only black person. She listened attentively while I was speaking, and then she said, "Well, but for me you are not black. I don't think that you are black." And she said that in a way as if she was doing me a favor.
I even forget that you're black.
Du bist nicht wirklich schwarz.
I don't think that you're black.
Du bist aber nur halb schwarz.
Im Sommer bin ich genauso dunkel wie du.
Well, for me, you're not black.
I would say we are talking about negation. This infernal circle. When people like me, they say that I'm not black. When they dislike me, they say that it is not because I'm black. Either way, I am trapped in their racisms.
Me and my boyfriend used to go to a cafe and have long, long conversations. We used to spend a long time there. We had all kinds of conversation about nothing really special. He was a jazz musician. And I remember one day he was telling me what kind of jokes he and his musicians friends used to tell. And I asked him, "Tell me one." He said that he cannot. And I said, "Come on, tell me." And then he explained that he knows one joke, but he cannot really tell. And I insisted, "Come on, tell me, tell me." He got a piece of paper and drew a circle with 2 triangles inside and asked me,
What is it about?
"It looks like a Red Cross sign that has been erased."
No. There's 2 Ku Klux Klan members looking down at the black man who was thrown into the hole.
I started feeling this pain in my body, an ache in my hands and in my fingers. It hurt. My whole body was in pain. Me too was placed below his white feet.
Desire and envy. A white jazz musician playing the music of the black man, desiring him, and at the same time murdering the black man, for he cannot be black. It is a lynch. In his fantasy, he is lynching the black man. Are you aware what a lynch is? Black men beaten to death or cut in pieces, subjected to rituals of castration and hanged in trees like strange fruits, as the song tells, pieces of black men, hands, tongues, ears, testicles, fingers, penises, there, hanging in trees like fruits. Strange, isn't it? Violently strange. I think that this desire for the death of the black man is in fact an unsolved Oedipus complex. What do you think?
These videos that are coming sometimes in this story, I think I have one more. We're going to see only two. But it's part of this story and part of the book, Plantation Memories, and then I decided to adapt the book into stage and turn it into performance. And that's when I then work with these 5 actors and try to bring the book and to make it vivid on stage. And it speaks always about this unreason and how racism is unreasonable, illogical. And we try very hard to apply reason within unreason. And in something so illogical as racism, we try very hard to bring some logic, but you cannot, because it is something unreasonable. So I go back to the text and talking about this unreason, especially this last comment that you over-interpret reality. In this last comment in particular, there are 2 very powerful moments. The first moment is a form of warning, which describes the standpoint of the black woman as a distortion of the truth, expressed here through the word over-interpretation. Black people always over-interpret things. The black female colleague was warning me that I am reading over beyond the norms of traditional epistemology, and therefore I am producing invalid knowledge. It seems to me that this idea of over-interpretation addresses the thought that the oppressed is seeing something which is not to be seen, and it is about saying something which is not to be said. Curiously, in the feminist discourse as well, men try to irrationalize the thinking and the knowledge of women, as if such feminist interpretations were nothing but the fabrication of the reality, an illusion, or maybe even a female hallucination. Within this constellation, however, it is the white woman who is irrationalizing the thinking of the black woman, and by doing so, she defines to the black woman what real scholarship is and how it should be expressed and written. This reveals how complex this intersection between gender, race and power is, but this is another story for another day. In the second moment, she then speaks of hierarchical places over which she fantasizes we want to be, but whom we cannot become. The queen is a very interesting metaphor. It is a metaphor for power. It is also a metaphor of the idea that certain bodies belong to certain places. Such demarcation of spaces introduces a dynamic in which blackness signifies being outside place. I am said to be outside my place, as a body that is not at home. Within racism, black bodies are constructed as improper bodies, as bodies that are not at home. They are outside place and therefore they cannot belong. White bodies, on the contrary, are constructed as proper, as clean, proper bodies. They are bodies that are always in place and always at home. It doesn't matter where, they always belong. Through such comments, black people are persistently invited to return to their place, outside institutions, at the margins, where their bodies belong. Can you see the next one, Carlos? Please.
I hate when people touch my hair.
Ask me where I'm from.
I never felt that before in my body.
In my fingers.
I explained to her that I do not like them.
She told me her Cuban friend likes it.
I grew up hearing this word.
It must be something bad.
He apologized immediately.
How do I wash my hair?
With water and shampoo.
She committed suicide.
I think she was very lonely.
I could not believe it.
He smelled my hair and sang that song.
About monkeys.
I had to be better than all the others.
3 times.
Black and smart.
Angry.
I am not aggressive.
Angry because this is aggressive.
Yes, I combed it.
I do not want to be better.
Imagine being the only black person in the family.
I do not want to be worse.
I realized how much of myself I have out at risk.
I had to read a lot.
Learn.
Study.
I read many books. People always ask me, where do I come from? Since I was a child. They see you and the first thing that crosses their mind is to check, where is she from? They just ask without even knowing you. It does not matter where you are at. In a bus, at a party, on the street, at dinner, or even in the supermarket. I am being asked in the first place because I am categorized as a race, which does not belong.
And if I answer and say that I am German, they look confused. They stop for a moment like thinking, German? Or they just start laughing as if I misunderstood the question or gave the wrong answer. You know? And they go, oh, no, but you cannot be German. You don't look German. Pointing at my skin.
One is black or German, not black and German.
It seems one can only exist through an alienated image of oneself.
The question contains the colonial fantasy that German means white and black means Ausländer.
I have to add another component. Race and voyeurism. People come to ask where I am from because they have pleasure through the exhibition of otherness. They are not interested in hearing that I am from Berlin, but rather they want to hear a very exotic story where the colonial fantasies about the remote other are revived. I'm expected to provoke pleasure. I'm addressed impatiently, question after question. The white audience addresses me on the search of that paradise.
What about your parents? Where are they from?
Ich fühle mich wie Antaios im Kampf mit Herakles. Entrissen meiner Kräfte, erwürgt von Herakles. Ich fühle mich wie Antaios im Kampf mit Herakles. Entrissen meiner Kräfte, erwürgt von Herakles. Ich fühle mich wie Antaios im Kampf mit Herakles. Entrissen meiner Kräfte, erwürgt von Herakles. Ich fühle mich wie Antaios im Kampf mit Herakles. Entrissen meiner Kräfte.
This is incoherence that we try to break down and also to create an emancipative and alternative knowledge that it seems never to arrive. When we say, I am Portuguese or I am German, and you keep hearing, but you cannot be. It's this incoherence, this illogical, this unreason of racism. When we produce knowledge in these spaces like theatre like cultural spaces, like the university. We often forget that these spaces are not neutral spaces. These are neither neutral nor simple spaces of knowledge and of wisdom, of performance, science and scholarship. These are spaces that historically have been produced violence. These are spaces of violence. These are spaces which historically have a very problematic relationship with blackness. Here we have been objectified, classified, theorized, dehumanized, infantilized, criminalized, brutalized, sexualized, exposed, exhibited, and sometimes even killed. What else? What else could this be for me but an amputation, an excision, an hemorrhage that spattered my whole body with black blood? Are the words of Fanon. He uses the language of trauma like most of black people when speaking of their everyday experience with racism, indicating the painful body impact and the loss characteristic of a traumatic collapse. For within racism, one is like surgically removed and violently separated of whatever identity one might really have. I felt blades open within me, and I could no longer laugh. There is indeed nothing to laugh about, as one is constantly being over-determined from the outside by violent fantasies one sees, but one does not recognize as being oneself. I cannot even go to a film, he writes. I wait for me. He waits for the black savages, the black barbarians, the black servants, the black prostitutes, whores and courtesans. He waits for the black criminals, murderers and drug dealers. He waits for what he is not. What an alienation, isn't it? To be forced to relate to oneself and to give a performance of oneself scripted by the white subject. And what a disappointment to be forced to look at oneself as if one was in their place. And what a pain to be trapped in this colonial order still today, 2016. What a pain. This all seems like very private information that I'm giving you, but such apparently private information is not private at all. These are not personal stories or intimate complaints, but rather accounts of racism within the academic, artistic and cultural spaces. And these reveal the inadequacy of those spaces to relate not only to the post-colonial condition, but also with their subjects, their discourses, their perspectives, their narratives, and their knowledges. And this should be our preoccupation. It should be our preoccupation and our project, the project of decolonizing. To decolonize knowledge, we do have to understand that we all speak from a specific time and place, from a specific reality and a specific history. There are no neutral discourses. When what artists claim not to have a neutral and objective discourse, they are not acknowledging that they too write and perform from a specific place, which of course is neither neutral nor objective or universal, but dominant. They write and perform from a place of power. You know, there is this anecdote. A black woman says, everybody's in the room, and the black woman raises the hand and says, I am a black woman. And the white woman who's in the room raises the hand and says, I am a woman. And then there's also a white man in the room and raises the hand and says, I'm a person. This is the colonial order. Whiteness remains unmarked. Whiteness, like other identities in power, remains unnamed. It is an absent center, an identity that places itself at the center of everything, but this centrality is not regarded as relevant, because it is presented as the synonymous of human. In general, white people do not see themselves as white, but rather as people. Whiteness is felt to be the human condition, and it is exactly this equation that secures whiteness as an identity that marks others and remains unmarked, and it is exactly this equation that perpetuates colonialism, colonial thinking, and colonial discourses. And I believe there is no more powerful position than just being the norm, and being the normality, and being the privileged. Decolonizing knowledge is about deconstructing exactly that. It means we have to create new configurations of knowledge and new configurations of power. So, in other words, and to conclude today, if my work seems preoccupied with narrating positions and subjectivity as part of knowledge production, then it is worth remembering and not forgetting that knowledge is neither universal nor neutral, but rather always placed somewhere, in a time, in a place, in a history, and is always written by someone who has a biography and a story. Let's see the last video, Carlos. Muito obrigada.